Hello, welcome y bienvenidos. My name is Paco Retana, and I use he, him as my preferred gender pronoun, or you can just call me Paco. I serve as a board member of the UCLA Alumni Association and co-chair of the UCLA Diversity Advisory Committee. I am a Latino male. I'm wearing a blue coat, tie, and some not glasses today. Sorry about that. In my Zoom background is Royce Hall with an image of Reginaldo Francisco del Valle. So thank you for joining us this afternoon for our virtual event. Tonight, we will begin with a presentation from Dr. David Hayes-Bautista, who will enlighten and teach us about Reginaldo Francisco del Valle and his role as a legislator in founding the Branch State Normal School at Los Angeles, which later served as the foundation for our beloved UCLA. We will then follow with a brief breakout room session to allow you to have a moment of discussion with each other before regrouping for a facilitated discussion with Dr. David Hayes-Bautista and the Center for the Study of Latino Health and Culture Chief of Staff, Seira, Santizo, Greenwood, led by UCLA Alumni Association board member, friend, and co-chair of the UCLA Diversity Advisory Committee, Mr. Carlos Collard. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. David Hayes-Bautista. Is currently the Distinguished Professor of Medicine and Director of the Center for the Study of Latino Health and Culture at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. He graduated from UC Berkeley and completed his doctoral work in basic sciences at the University of California Medical Center, San Francisco. Dr. Hayes-Bautista served on the faculty at the School of Public Health at UC Berkeley until 1987, when he took his current position at UCLA. For decades, Dr. Hayes-Bautista has prepared minority medical researchers to use their lived experience of the Latino double imposture syndrome as the basis for leadership in the research laboratory to create better science to provide care to Californians' multicultural, multiracial patient population. For the past 5 years, he has been chosen one of the 101 top leaders of the Latino community in the US by Latino Leaders magazine. In addition to lecturing in a number of leadership programs ranging from Chicano Latino Youth Leadership Program to the Denver Latino Leadership Institute, he has served as faculty director for the AGSM Latino Leadership Institute since 2003. Dr. Hayes-Bautista writes columns in the Los Angeles Times, La Opinión, and is often asked to provide opinions on radio and television, both Spanish and English. He recently wrote a book detailing the history of the Latino leadership in the healthcare sector, the Chicano boom in Healing, California, 1965 to 1985. It is un placer, it is a pleasure to introduce Dr. David Hayes-Bautista.
Thank you, Don Paco. Thank you. Let me share my screen here and we can get started. To learn a little bit about Reginaldo Francisco del Valle, who is legitimately, I think, we should consider our founding forefather. So how did this work? Let's take a look. Just a second. I need to put it on full screen. There we go. You'd think I'd learn how to do this one of these days. And in fact, through him, we're going to look at a larger issue, which is the issue of Latino leadership in American society. And of course, here at UCLA. And if people have never heard of Latino leadership, we're about to take a deep, deep dive. And I want you to remember this name, Reginaldo Francisco del Valle. Because he was one of just many examples of exercising Latino leadership in academia here in California. So let's take a look at the backstory to begin with. His family was an old California family. His mother was Isabel Varela del Valle, and the Varela family arrived here in Alta California in 1775 along with Brianza. And then one branch kept moving and wound up in New Mexico and Arizona and Colorado. That's another story. His father had arrived from Jalisco, Mexico in 1825. and wound up developing Rancho Camalos in Ventura County, which is now I believe it's a county park. It's a state park. The story really kind of takes off in 1810 on Mexican Independence Day, 1816, when Father Hidalgo, of course, declared Mexico's independence from Spain. But importantly for this story, and importantly for us here, literally in the same breath, Father Hidalgo also declared the abolition of slavery in Mexico. Now, slavery had been part of Mexican history for 300 years under the Spanish crown. But for Hidalgo, the issue was, well, how could we be a modern republic, a modern democracy, and still hold other human beings in slavery? So he said, we're going to get rid of it. And he was really serious about this. In fact, he said, as he was abolishing slavery, not only was he freeing the slaves, he was giving the owners 10 days to free their slaves, or he was going to put the owners in jail. He was very serious about this. Also, as part of this Declaration of Independence, he declared racial equality and civil rights. And then, although it wasn't part of the Declaration of Independence, what he continued in Mexican constitutional law was the old Iberian tradition that married women could own property independently of their husband. It dates back to Alfonso X. And Mexico is not the only one that did this. In fact, literally every single Latin American country, upon achieving independence from Spain, abolished slavery, declared racial equality and citizenship, and also continued the Iberian legal tradition that married women could own property independently of their husbands. Every single country. You could say this is a very Americano thing to do. We here up in California, of course, we're part of Mexico. So these were the constitutional values that the folks here knew. And you had about a generation that grew up just thinking, well, it's normal, of course, that slavery would be abolished, that racial equality would be the law of the land, and that married women would have rights. I mean, just sounds normal, doesn't it? But things changed with what I term the Latino Big Bang. 10 days that shook the Spanish-speaking world, not only in California, but in the United States and in the Western Hemisphere. The Big Bang began January 24th, 1848, with the discovery of gold. Now, I think we're all aware of the discovery of gold. It's a big deal. I went to high school right at the edge of the gold country, and I heard all my life about 49ers that trekked across the plains and about 49ers that sailed around the Horn. I never heard that there were any Spanish-speaking miners, just never, ever heard of it. Well, since then, I've come to discover that it wasn't that Latinos didn't care about gold. Latinos did. And in fact, there was a huge in-migration from Mexico, Central and South America, and the Caribbean. Then just 10 days later, the US takes over California with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So these are big changes. Suddenly, a lot of immigration because of the gold rush, and suddenly we're in a different country, although we didn't go anywhere. And the US Constitution was very different in that the US Constitution permitted slavery. The US Constitution is based on white supremacy, that non-whites could not be citizens. And under the US Constitution, once a woman married, she basically lost all of her rights. She had no legal standing. Her husband was going to take all decisions for her. Well, when Latinos heard this, they said, hey, wait a minute, this is not a good way to run a country. So Latinos went to the California Constitutional Convention. And I have the minutes in Spanish of the Constitutional Convention where all the issues of translation came up. But they had a different view, and they argued, and they helped to write the Constitución del Estado de California. Oh, they also wrote a version in English, and California actually came in as a bilingual state, and the Constitution very clearly stated that all laws, decrees, regulations, and provisions, which from their nature require publication, shall be published in English and Spanish. Spanish is not a foreign language in California, in spite of what some people think. It's the way we came into the United States. They argued and argued about it, but Latinos held firm, and California actually continued Mexico's previous abolition of slavery. We came in as a free state. And in fact, we came in as a free state without the accompanying slave state. If you remember the Missouri Compromise back in high school, we upset the balance between the free and the slave state. In fact, our entry as a free state in upsetting the balance led inevitably to the American Civil War. The California Constitution also extended citizenship to non-whites, so that here we see Governor Pio de Jesus Pico, the last Mexican governor of California. Clearly, he was of African and indigenous origin. He was a citizen and he voted. If he had ever traveled to Alabama, he would have been property and would have been put into chains. Women also were able to retain their right to own property, married women. And we see this just 7 years later, this ad taken out in a newspaper here in Los Angeles by Petra Varela. She would be some relative of Del Valle, de Rubio. So we know she's married, a person by the name of Rubio, who took out this ad, this aviso, to warn people that, quote, none of my children has the right nor authority to sell grapes from my vineyards, not my husband's vineyard, my vineyard, because I alone am the absolute owner of this property. Yo sola soy dueña absoluta de esa propiedad. Now, if she had been in Pennsylvania, she would have gone to hubby and asked, hubby, please do something. This is California. She owned it. She took care of it. So these were the constitutional values in the California's Constitution of 1849, and Del Valle was born into them around about 1854. And this was the Del Valle house. It's about where Union Station is now. But growing up, his experience was going to be different from his parents. He would have the experience of being actually the first cohort of second generation children, children of immigrants, although his parents didn't immigrate, but the US basically moved in. So Latinos had the experience almost of being immigrants without moving. But the difference from his parents is that he was a US citizen from the moment he was born, and he was bilingual all his life, actually trilingual. He spoke 3 languages, and bicultural all his life. So what did it mean to be bilingual, bicultural back during the gold rush? Well, one thing that it meant was that Mexican independence was a perfectly good holiday, and Latinos didn't give up celebrating. So here they are in 1856, still celebrating the 16th of September. But because we're now part of the United States, what we do is we add in another Independence Day, and we also celebrated the 4 de Julio, the 4th of July, there in 1858, also here in Los Angeles. There were a number of newspapers published, such as El Clamor Público, published here in Los Angeles, and a lot of them were bilingual. So you notice this first page is in Spanish, then you turn the page, and the next page is in English, just like we do today. Del Valle went to school here in Los Angeles, and there were bilingual schools. For example, in this one, in 1874, a little bit later, they were still doing bilingual schools. Then he went to St. Vincent's College, El Colegio de San Vicente, which was kind of a high school then, which was the predecessor of Loyola Marymount. Then he went to college at Santa Clara University in Santa Clara County, where he graduated. He then read law and studied to become a lawyer. While he was growing up, however, Latinos, and he also personally had to deal with the white supremacists, the nativists, just as we have them today. And in fact, they began literally a year after he was born. There was the first white supremacist movement called the American Know Nothing Party. You may have heard about this in high school. Basically, the Know Nothing Party didn't like immigrants, didn't like Latinos, didn't like Catholics. They wanted to strip Latinos of their citizenship. Does this sound familiar? And they swept the elections across the country. They took almost every office in California on a very restrictive platform. So this fed into the American Civil War. By the way, the American Know Nothing Party is all right with slavery. They didn't have any problem with that. So the country slid into the American Civil War just as Del Valle was an elementary school student. And I wrote a book about this because it's during the American Civil War that we began celebrating El Cinco de Mayo as part of the Latino experience of the American Civil War. And it was around the issues of freedom, slavery, equality, and everything else. After the American Civil War, there was a period of Reconstruction, which was supposed to achieve civil rights, but then you had an upwelling of a new nativist movement. This white men must rule America movement. And by the 1870s, an end was put to Reconstruction. And here in California, our version of the anti-Reconstruction movement was Dennis Kearney and the Working Man's Party, who ran on a very nativist ticket to kick the Chinese out of California, to strip the Indians of their citizenship, and he got rid of the bilingual provisions of the original Constitution. I mean, it was a pretty sweeping ethnic cleansing of California. Well, Del Valle had just passed the bar, and he was just beginning his career. So in the middle of Dennis Kearney's kicking the Chinese out of California, he decided to run for the state assembly representing Los Angeles. And his very first motion, his first attempt to pass legislation, was to combat the elimination of the bilingual provisions of the California Constitution. And he lost, but it served as a marker that he was here to see things done right. And he was here on the side of freedom, democracy, and equality. While he was in his first year, he saw an opportunity to try to bring higher education here to Los Angeles. But it was a difficult opportunity because back in 1880, because of the gold rush, over 90% of California's population lived in the northern counties. Only 8.5% lived in the southern counties. It's different now, but that's the way it was back in 1880. And all of the state institutions, that's why the capital of Sacramento's in Sacramento's up in the north. Every single state institution in the northern counties, the state hospitals, libraries, jails, courts, insane asylum, the University of California at Berkeley, the state normal school at San Jose, they were all up north. There was nothing down here. But the San Jose State Normal School burnt down in 1880, just as Del Valle had been in office as an assembly member for about a month. Clearly, it needed to be rebuilt. But because the state had grown so much in population, it was clear that they needed to build a second normal school. But where would that be situated? Well, remember, all the action was up north. And so all the representatives from the north, from Shasta County, Redding, Nevada City, Marysville, San Andreas, Santa Rosa, San Jose, Fresno, all said, "Oh, why don't you build it in my city?" And Del Valle was the only one from Southern California who raised his hand and said, "Well, why don't we build it in Los Angeles?" You can tell that the stack was very much stacked. The deck was stacked against him. He didn't have very good odds, but turns out he was an excellent parliamentarian. He taught parliamentary law later on here in Los Angeles. As he was described at the time, Senator Reginaldo Francisco del Valle from Los Angeles is the parliamentarian par excellence in the upper house. He later moved on to the Senate. No one ever thinks of appealing from his decisions. So he actually did the work that was necessary, so that by 1881, he was able to establish the branch of the state normal school here in Los Angeles. And this was remembered back in 1937. While in the Senate, he secured for Los Angeles the state normal school. It was approved in 1881, built, and it was the first state institution in Southern California as a branch of the state normal school in San Jose. Later on in the Senate, he was the president pro tem of the Senate. If you remember when President Kevin De Leon was often introduced as the second Latino president, the first one in 130 years, Del Valle was the predecessor. Then he got the branch independent, so it was no longer just a branch of the San Jose school. It became independent. It had its own governing board representing Southern California. So he did all the heavy lifting to bring higher education here to Los Angeles. And then, of course, in 1890, we had another resurgence of the white supremacist movement called the American Protective Association. The American Protective, well, they're trying to protect America from what? From immigrants, from Catholics, from Latinos, from non-whites, et cetera. It's a very anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, anti-Asian movement. And Del Valle came out slugging. In 1894, he was interviewed by the editor of a local newspaper, Las Dos Republicas, about the American Protective Association, Los APA. And basically he read them out. He said, you guys are crazy. He then entered public life and he was president of the Water and Power Commission, and he was William Mulholland's boss. Now, everybody talks about Mulholland and water. Mulholland just dug ditches. It was Del Valle that brought water to Los Angeles. Del Valle was president of the Board of Water and Power Commissioners. Mulholland was his employee. Mulholland reported to Del Valle. And in Del Valle's obituary, the LA Times noted, to him, as much as to anyone, Los Angeles owes the mighty aqueduct that was built to tap the water sources of the Seira. Del Valle, was the one who brought water to Los Angeles with vision. He then also opened up, by the way, the Metropolitan Water District to bring water from the Colorado River. And in the 19-teens, once again, we have another upsurgence of white supremacists, the Ku Klux Klan, and racial segregation hits here in Southern California. We had the Klan marching the streets here in Oxnard, Orange County. And of course, the Latino newspapers knew all about this. Latinos were aware of what was happening. And Del Valle, once again, stood up for Latinos to the extent that he was given a citation of merit by the Liga Protectora Latina for his work in assuring protection, equality, and justice in bien de la raza. Now, how UC Berkeley was founded. I was at Berkeley. I was an undergraduate in 1968. So I remember how it was founded. Basically, the regents absorbed the assets of a predecessor institution. There was the old College of California, Methodist College in Oakland that actually owned land in Berkeley. So the regents bought out the College of California, absorbed their assets, their buildings, grounds, faculty, students, you name it, and then moved everything up to Berkeley. And along with the group, the stuff that they acquired from the Methodist College of California was a faculty member named Henry Durant. But he is not the leader of the College of California. In fact, he was described as, quote, not exactly the man to be head of it. He was inherited. And while UC was trying to find a president, he was about the only faculty around. So he was named interim president until they found a real president. And then he promptly retired. He basically didn't do very much to build UC Berkeley. But everybody remembers Durant. And there's a Durant Hall at Berkeley. Almost every campus of the UC system has a Durant Hall or a Durant Street or something. He gets all the glory. He didn't do very much, quite frankly. Then in 1919, the regents decided to do the same thing to create a presence here. They looked at various entities. They looked at, for example, the Throop Institute. We were almost UC Pasadena. And, you know, my favorite cousin lived in Pasadena. But just think, you can't do the ACLAC, UC Pasadena. It just doesn't happen. Anyway, the regents chose the Los Angeles State Normal School, and in the place instead, on the site of the Los Angeles State Normal School, the regents of the university shall conduct at Los Angeles a branch of the University of California. Now, the State Normal School was downtown at that point, needed to expand. So they looked west here, where we had a lot of unbuilt land, and they looked at the Rancho San Jose de los Buenos Aires. Here's a map of the ranchos in Los Angeles, and here is right here in the middle of San Jose de los Buenos Aires. Over here is the Boca de Santa Monica, the Reyes family still over there. And that ranch was owned by Marcos Alanis, who, if you look closely at him, is clearly of indigenous and African and maybe Iberian origin. But he owned this land that we're sited on. And the Westwood campus was built and dedicated in 1930. Now, in order to dedicate it, they didn't have a Founder's Rock. Berkeley has a Founder's Rock, which is a natural outcropping. So they found this big boulder up in Paris Valley and moved it down to Westwood and plopped it down in the middle of campus and said, boom, here's our Founder's Rock. Well, it's kind of a fake Founder's Rock. It wasn't there. Then they had the dedication of the Westwood campus, 2 to 3 days of speeches, processions, you name it. But they had one big omission. Reginaldo Francisco del Valle was still around. He was still Mulholland's boss. He had won legislative approval for the state normal school, got it constructed, made sure it got a budget every year, got it as independent governors. He was often a speaker at graduation. But when the Westwood campus was dedicated, he was not asked to be a speaker. He was not mentioned by any of the speakers. He was not invited to march in any academic procession. In fact, we've looked at the guest list, and so far appears he was not even an invited guest. And in fact, the predecessor institution was only mentioned once over the 2 days of ceremony. Well, Del Valle was big. He could look back and not hold any anger. But just shortly before his death, he looked back at his near century in California and the changes. And he said that socially, California is a continuation of Mexican colonial culture, which in many ways it is. And he was very clear when people would say, oh, Mr. Del Valle, you're one of those old Spanish families. He'd say, nope, we're Mexican, not Spanish. Well, the centennial in 2019, we decided we needed to rectify this omission. So what we did is we had a ceremony at Founders Rock to honor Reginaldo Francisco del Valle, because without the state normal school here, there would have been no state university in Los Angeles. There would not have been a UC. So we finally recognized him ourselves as part of the 100th anniversary of UCLA. And we started at the Bruin Plaza, and we had a march all the way from the Bear, all the way up to Founders Rock with mariachi, with folklóricos. We had a ceremony. We were given citations by the state legislature, by the county supervisors, by the city mayor. And this is one of Del Valle's collateral descendants who is helping us. And there's Seira in the background. And at least we tried to make sure that people understood they could thank a bilingual, bicultural Latino for this wonderful campus. And we finally got him remembered. His living legacy, however, is even more striking. He had a daughter, Lucrecia del Valle, who in fact was an actress. And she was very involved with Ed Roybal, who was later to become congressman from Los Angeles. She supported him. She created a group called Women for Roybal. He ran for lieutenant governor before he ran for city council and then for Congress. And he was in the Congress for quite a while, Eduardo Roybal. And he was one of the founders of the Community Service Organization. And if you see this figure right here, was a junior member who worked with him. Kind of, Roybal was a mentor to Cesar Chavez. And of course, we know about Cesar Chavez. And we established the Cesar Chavez Department of Chicano and Chicano Studies back in the 1990s. With just a direct linkage from Del Valle to his daughter, to Ed Roybal, to Cesar Chavez. Just one last thing, by the way. Just one last thing. He was Mexicano, he was Latino, very proud of it. And he would hate it when people mangled the pronunciation. They would pronounce this as Los Angeles or other sorts of things. And whether he was arguing a case in court or whether he was presenting an award or doing a speech, when he heard his town being mangled in its pronunciation, he would say, wait, stop, 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 stop. Don't say it like that. Just say Los Angeles. Everybody ought to be able to do that. You see Los Angeles. Just say Los Angeles. So what are we going to do now that the centennial is drawing to a close? Do we have a statue, a bust, a portrait of Murphy Hall, name a building after him? Somehow, I mean, Durant gets so much recognition for having done so little. Del Valle not only brought the state normal school into being, he did so against great opposition from the recurrent nativist movements. Didn't slow him down. So let me just say, this is not the end. This is just the beginning as we remember Reginaldo Francisco del Valle. Thank you very much.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Wow, this is my second time hearing this presentation, and it's amazing. So I hope you had a great, short but impactful discussion in your breakout session. My name is Carlos Collard, and I use he/him pronouns. I serve as a board member of the UCLA Alumni Association, and I co-chair the UCLA Alumni Diversity Advisory Committee, along with Paco Retana. I'm a Latino male, and I am wearing a coat, and I have salt and pepper hair. And behind me is an image of Royce Hall with Reginaldo Francisco del Valle right behind me. I will be facilitating the discussion with our guest panelists. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat. And toward the end, we will allow a few folks to unmute themselves to ask questions if you feel comfortable doing so. So now let me introduce our panelists. Dr. David Hayes-Bautista is currently a distinguished professor of medicine and director of the Center for the Study of Latino Health and Culture, or otherwise known as CESLAC, at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. We are also joined by Seira Santizo Greenwood. Seira is currently the Chief of Staff at the Center for the Study of Latino Health and Culture, Director of the Medical Preparation and Education Pipeline Program, MedPep, and serves on the UCLA Chancellor's Hispanic Serving Institution Committee, which is a campus-wide task force. Her work reflects her commitment to advocacy, or to advocate, empower, and inspire students interested in pursuing a healthcare career to continue on their path and overcome imposter syndrome. Originally from Guatemala, Greenwood's path to UCLA was non-traditional, being undocumented and entering as a transfer student from Santa Monica College. She graduated with honors from UCLA in 2010 with a BA in Communication Studies and a minor in Gender Studies. Her experience inspire and empower others to action. She is committed to service, fundraising, and mentoring in several spaces, including the UCLA Latino Alumni Association, where she served as the University Relations Co-Chair from 2016 to 2018. The UCLA Latino Staff and Faculty Association, she served as Vice President from 2014 to 2016. The UCLA Young Alumni Development Council, UCLA Golden Key International Society, and Santa Monica Dance Department, or Ballet Folklorico Flor de Mayo. She is a former Miss Asociación de Fraternidades Guatemaltecas from 2010 to 2002, and Miss Guatemala USA Executive Director. And I will add, she's also a neighbor. And just a little fun fact, her name is Aries spelled backwards. So Dr. Hayes-Bautista, Seira, welcome. I have to say this is, I heard this presentation 2 years ago, about 2 years ago on campus with a small audience. There's about 20 of us. And I first heard this and I said, wow, we need to get this story out to our communities, to alumni, to UCLA, because it's such a, it's us, right? It represents our history, but it's so impactful, and it's also it's the truth. And as you guys recall, this presentation tonight has been literally almost 2 years in the making, where, because of COVID, we had to reschedule our other plans that we had last year for an in-person event. So I'm really grateful that we're sharing the space, and that all of you in the audience today, from not only California, from not only America, but from other parts of the world, are here with us to hear this important and very valuable story about our history, and where we come from. So with this sense of history, let me ask the first question to Dr. Hayes-Bautista. I mean, this has been a work in progress for you for such a long time. I read that back in prior to even 2008, you stumbled across this story or pieces of it back in a Long Beach bookstore. And I'd like to, if you could share with us, what was it like to learn about him, about Reginaldo Francisco del Valle at that time? And take it back to that moment. How did you feel? And what did you feel the need to do? And how did that culminate in him getting recognized in Chancellor Bloch's inauguration speech in 2008?
Well, I'm at the School of Medicine, so I primarily do health sciences research. But because of the unique strengths of Latino health, I needed to discover, well, why are Latinos doing so well in terms of health? And that's when I realized, I was born and raised here in California, went to schools. I could tell you when the Spanish missionaries got here. I didn't know when the Mexicans got here. I really didn't. So I decided I need to find this out. So starting about 2003, we put the resources of my center, part of it to answering that question. We now have the answer. And as part of my work today, we've been doing a lot of work on COVID. Every day I read two newspapers. I read the Los Angeles Times and I read La Opinión. And in the pages of the Los Angeles Times, you rarely see Latinos. And when they are mentioned, generally up until very, very recently, it has been either as undocumented immigrants or gangbangers or teenage pregnant moms on welfare. You read La Opinión, it's like you enter a parallel universe. They're describing a completely different world. And that was going on back in the gold rush. The same sort of situation. So one of my things I've learned is if I'm reading the LA Times and they just mention a Latino somewhere, I know there's more to the story. So I want to dig into it. So I was coming back from a lunch I'd had at a hospital in Orange County. And I just happened to be passing my favorite bookstore in the world, which is now unfortunately closed, Acres of Books in Long Beach. Been going there since I was a kid. So I went in just to see what they had. And I saw a book on the wall. In fact, it's this book right here. It was sitting on the University of California at Los Angeles. That's all it said. So I pulled it out, and it was a history of the early years of UCLA, particularly about the buying of the lands, the movement out to Westwood. And apparently the author had been suspected of putting his hand in the till. So he sort of wrote this book to excuse himself, to say, no, my hand wasn't in the till. And in this, twice, he mentions Del Valle, but very despicably, like, oh, he was here, but he didn't do very much. Well, I'm reading the LA Times. Okay, I know there's more to the story. So I got this book and I do what I do. I did research. So I pulled up the minutes of the state assembly and the state senate for these years. I brought in the majority whip, assembly member Marco Feuerbach, to sort of translate for me, because the minutes just tell you the decisions made on the floor, but there were discussions off the floor that would lead to the things on the floor. So what had to be happening so that these motions would be made and approved or whatever else. And that's what was clear to both of us, that Del Valle did the major work. He actually got this happen. So even though this particular author just almost dismissed him, that's kind of typical. But we know the story. So he wrote the paper and it was published in 2008. And unfortunately, Assemblyman Feuerbach died a week and a half before our big press conference to unleash this paper. So we turned it kind of into a memorial service for him. And some of his work is still doing good stuff in South Central LA. But in many ways, that's what I've been doing along with the medical stuff, is this history, just understanding Latinos in this state. And so we have now a complete demographic history. We've written a number of papers. I'm going to be doing a book on Latino demographic history, basically 250 years of Latino presence here in California. And it helps me to connect, because all my life I've gone down Pico Boulevard, Sepulveda, Figueroa. They're just street names. Now I think of people. Now I think of Cinco de Mayo. I think of Latinos who have been here ever since 1781, and many of them are still here. They didn't go away. So it makes me feel actually more connected to UCLA now that I know the story, and I can compare what Del Valle did to Durant. A Latino did this.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like that was a lot of work, like behind the scenes, right? Like you did a lot of this research and brought it to life here for UCLA. Now, speaking of behind the scenes, you know, Seira, you have been involved with UCLA in so many different ways. And you've been a board member of the UCLA Latino Alumni Association, and you continue to be active member today. And I know you've done a lot of work, again, behind the scenes, right? And I would like to know, and if you could tell us, how has your experience as a UCLA alumna informed your personal identity and influenced your career?
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Dr. Hayes. And I just want to say welcome to everybody, and thank you for being in this space and taking time out of Tuesday and being here with us. I think, you know, go UCLA, go Bruins. By a show of hands, I'm pretty sure we all share, you know, that shared experience one way or another. This campus has been for me as an alum, it is that belonging. It is that hashtag we are UCLA for us, Somos UCLA. I will tell you that the first time that I came to the United States in my teens, and so my first job was in the Valley, so I had to take the bus, and the bus passed by UCLA to make it out to Studio City, where my first job was. I was a caregiver at that point, and seeing that campus, that majestic campus, that energy, that light, it always attracted me, but it really, I didn't know that power and that value until I made it to the space. Right now we're on yield, so thank you to everybody that's volunteering right now, calling the students. Yesterday, I was just telling Corey, you know, I'm making my calls, and yeah, they're supposed to be 5 minutes, and what? Let me answer your questions. And here I am having 20-minute, 30-minute conversations with the students, and it's more about that space of knowing that I've had the great honor and privilege to be today here sharing with you, of learning from you all, of knowing that we all are committed to coming together with a vision and a goal of building a community. We are a community. We are UCLA. And when I started working with Dr. Hayes-Bautista, and I tell Dr. Hayes-Bautista this, I didn't think myself as a Latina. I don't even think I wrote myself as a Latina when I entered UCLA, because as an undocumented student and as a Guatemalan, I was like, what do you mean? I'm a Guatemalan. But it was more or less in capturing that. And if you know my last name too, I've been learning of all my identities. You know, I'm married to also someone that is biracial, and now my kids are multi-ethnic, multi-racial. So, you know, learning, I'm always learning, you know, and entering different spaces. And that's one thing that I truly appreciate of being with the great role models that I have. And I think with you, Carlos, we go way back to the Young Alumni Development Council days, and, you know, with some of our peers, and joining those committees really gave me something. They really gave me something that that belief in myself, that after I had gotten this amazing education, I was no longer, as an undocumented immigrant, having to navigate those spaces of coming from a shadow, you could say, where I myself had to feel, do I really belong here at UCLA? You know, am I really cut out for this material? And to me, it was a great privilege and honor to have those mentors that at AAP helped me, guide me to graduate. And I wanted to be that person to give back to the community. So being involved, I actually learned of Latino alumni when I was at YADC, not as a student. So I did not know of Latino alumni until then. And Angela, Soleil, Yadi, you know, they were my fee mentors, I will say at that point now, you know, being so that that energy where, you know, you come together and you learn from each other and you build something and you make something, and you're not there to get the accolades. You see the students graduate and you're moving. I was able to be at Raza grad and tell the students, move your tassel. You know, it was one of those great moments of where you've been in those spaces, and you just need to be together to celebrate. So I think that's what it has given me in my career. I think Dr. Hayes, I'm such a cheerleader. I guess it's like, let's do this. And I'll be like, sure, and it's like figuring it out as we go. But I love being in that space where you could actually learn as you go, because that is one thing I don't know everything. And I'm always grateful for the hands of my peers, one being Patricia, because without Patricia, I myself would not have continued to be engaged, because she's the strongest mentor for me, where I'm able to have conversations with her and learning more about how to be more effective, how to be more efficient, and being part of a board that teaches you SWOT analysis and all these fun things and skills that I think we all need is important too, to make our work, right? So I'm just learning from everybody. That's just really what it is. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you for that. So, just to touch on something you said, you mentioned your work experience. How has your own personal identity played a role in your work at CESLAC?
I just am that cheerleader. I think for me, it's just telling everyone that tells me too, because I still today, I don't know how many people have I text. I'm like, you should see my heart right now, like jumping at you all. Not the easiest spot to be talking about myself here. And I'm always telling everybody else, you could do this, you're gonna do it. And and I'm telling it back at me, you could do this. And it's just I guess it's in believing myself, and I guess having that mentor that's sitting right here doing this cutting edge research, knowing that it's also a shared vision, and that opportunity to say that it's okay to make mistakes, because that's why we're in research. Research is you stumble upon something and you come and dig in, as Dr. Hayes says, he gets into the weeds of things, and you start going into those rabbit holes, as he calls them. And the rabbit holes tell you something else, and you continue to learn about yourself. And it's about that self-growth. It's about that self-advocacy, that self-commitment. And then you're able to come into these shared spaces where we're all trying to be and build that global community. And for me, it's really that global community of health and wealth for everybody. So I think that's how it's influenced my career in a way, my identity, because it's just everything multifaceted. There's just too much involved.
Well, we appreciate you. UCLA appreciates you being so multifaceted. I'd like to touch on, you mentioned we're talking about careers here in fields of work, and Dr. Hayes-Bautista, you work for, you're a professor of medicine, and STEM fields are not often associated with activism. So how have you found your voice as an activist in your research and work?
Actually, being into health sciences makes it pretty easy. Although I got my start in this field not because of, at that point, being a faculty member. I was asked to help set up a small community clinic in Oakland, La Clínica de la Raza. I had the honor of being the first executive director. And I'm a science guy, and I was going to UCSF at that time. So we have a Latino physician shortage. We've seen very clearly in this COVID-19 pandemic just how bereft Latino communities are of just basic public health services. So they're the sciences, yes, they're the health sciences, but clearly as part of activism, we need to address the Latino physician shortage, the Latino nursing shortage, the dentist shortage, the lack of health insurance offered at the job site, just all these things. So I take science, they help drive my activism, but they also help me channel it so that I use data to make the points. I mean, when I keep telling everyone that the Latino physician shortage is so great that it would take all the medical schools, public and private in California, 500 years to make up the shortage for today. And one of the reasons why Latinos had higher positivity rates and admission rates and death rates due to COVID is basically when Senora Gomez would feel the calentura up here and the raspy cough. So she said, I need to see the doctor. Runs to see the doctor. Oh, Senora Gomez, you want to see the doctor? Take a seat, and the doctor will see you in 500 years. Hello, who would not be an activist when you see that?
That's right. That's keeping it real right there. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we have 3 questions in the chat. So Seira, this is for you. Many folks care about activist causes, but prefer not to be the face of a movement and would rather work behind the scenes. How has this type of activism personally fulfilled you?
I'm going to say that I cried the minute that image made it to that show light when Centennial, in May 2019. I've had a life of production, communication studies major maybe, but in the dance department, being a stage manager and a production assistant, the show must go on and the audience must not know that somebody lost their shoe in the back. Being in the action in the back of what holds everything together is something that I tell my children now, even our little helpers in our body. It's those unknowns that why are things running so smoothly? To me, it's like anytime we go to the campuses, it's like, wow, look, it looks so green. And it's like, well, yeah, look at the conserjes and all the work that, even the people that we don't see in the front, but make that a part of the experience. You come into this campus and this campus has that energy because of everybody's hand. And I think that's the power of also having that staff role. I'm not just an alum, I'm also a staff. And as being staff, we have so many alums on campus, but because we still hold together that shared identity, it's what continues to bring other students to this campus and which continues to hold us together to make and continue making this campus for all. And I know that it's challenging for all of us to believe this, because I have that problem too. And it's one thing that I continue to work, learning that and understanding that we can lead from where we are, because we do something for somebody else that makes an impact somewhere else. And it's just that snowball effect, right? But it's always with that shared vision. So it fulfills me every day, because it just makes me know that, yeah, the sun shines and hey, it's a new day, right? New opportunity to learn something new from somebody else. And I don't necessarily need to be in the front, because the impact that I want to make is helping others and making sure that everybody's able to fulfill their dream. I had dreams and I'm living the dreams. And as long as, we're able to, and I really want to get you all to go back to listening to and seeing that light show, because I was telling Corey today, I had to see it again today in the morning, because whoever wrote that script, it made me cry from the beginning, because not just the music, but on how it started of saying, that visionary, that Reginaldo had that vision of saying, LA, there's nothing on that side. Everybody is like, but everything, the popular stuff is over there. Why are you thinking of something else? Why do you have to challenge that narrative? Why do you have to be a challenger? Just stick, we're out of the box thinkers. And so I think that's what makes that activism a great place for me, because it makes it exciting every day. What new things are we going to get into and learn? So yeah.
Well, you have a lot of fans, because you can look at the chat and a lot of people who admire your work, both as a staff member and as a volunteer. So again, thank you, Seira, for all that you've done for UCLA over the years. And I know all that you will continue to do. And I'm going to switch to the chat. I'm going to combine a couple questions now. So first question, this is about the combo from Jason Red and Subin Motwani. So where can we learn more about Reginaldo Francisco del Valle? That's the first part. And then the second part is his story in the UCLA University archives? If it's not, is there a way to add it to make his story timeless?
Well, there are different ways to learn about them. During the 2019 centennial celebration, for example, we put together a pamphlet and we had some, what do you call it, the banners that you roll up made, but then we also printed them in the pamphlet. So that's probably the easiest way. And we can get it out to everybody in some fashion. I'm sure we can just flood your emails with it. We also have the paper that we wrote back in 2008. We can also send that out. And I think those are the immediate ways of learning more about it. Maybe there's a book there to be written. We need to learn more about it. I love doing these presentations, and we probably need to do some follow-up papers. We need to keep drilling down. We, for example, earlier this year, did some work on 3 Latinas who studied at the State Normal School at about the time that it transferred over to UCLA. And they were 3 amazing women. And they did wonderful things. One of them was a singer. One of them was an airplane pilot during World War I. Hello. I mean, they're just doing amazing things. And one actually was on the faculty here at UCLA in the Spanish department. Passed away not that long ago, about 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, there's a lot of amazing stories that we would like to get out. So we wanted to do a project with banners and everything else about these 3 amazing Latinas, but because we haven't done anything for 12 months, that's a little bit in abeyance, but we plan to. We have our podcasts. We had a podcast on Del Valle. We have a podcast on these 3 amazing Latina graduates, and we'll be doing more and more research and churning out more and more material. I'd love to do a children's coloring book the way we did on Cinco de Mayo. We're only limited by the lack of resources, but we could do all kinds of things.
So you mentioned that we have a lot of learning and sharing to do, and this is the burning question here from more than just people in the chat. But what's next to make Reginaldo's contributions visible at UCLA? Because I'll mention this. There's a post office near the 110 and the 10 freeway, a US post office named after him. And we all know that is blocks away from that other school. Right? So it seems natural to me, well, what UCLA, what are we going to do about that? So can you tell us, what can we do?
Oh, there are tons of things.
Yeah, let's name them all off.
Tons of things we could do. There are the immediate Del Valle oriented things. At the very least, we could have his portrait hung in Murphy Hall at the very least. So as students come in to transact their business, they can understand, they can thank this bilingual, bicultural Latino for being able to do this. We would have loved to have done a statue. After all, we do have the statue gardens. I really think there needs to be some public marker of what he did. And I keep saying to campus administration, because they're trying to increase the yield of students who have made it through the admissions process, that this campus should be shouting to the mountains. This is the only major campus of the University of California that was founded essentially by a Latino. No other campus can make that claim. Although even Berkeley had some interesting Latino faculty in its very first days, which they don't talk about. There's more Latino to the story of the University of California, I think, than people realize. And I think we could really dig in. So at the very least, we ought to commemorate in a public way Del Valle's contributions. And then there are other things. For example, Alanis sold some of this rancho de San Jose de los Buenos Aires to the Sepulvedas. And when they were building the central quad back in the 1930s and 1940s, there was still an adobe, a casa de adobe, owned by the Sepulvedas that still stood. And in order to make room for those 4 buildings, that adobe was disassembled brick by brick and the bricks were stored somewhere, and that house was supposed to have been reconstructed for educational purposes. And I'm trying to find out, where are those adobe bricks? Let's find them and let's rebuild that house. I mean, what an educational experience. So there are lots of things we could do.
What would be the step today, tonight, tomorrow that we could, is it helping, is it signing a petition? Is it donating to SESLAC? Is it, what is it what's that immediate action that we could do right now?
Well, one immediate action is that through the Latino Staff Faculty Association, Tony has put together a letter requesting that a hall be named after him. And I'm not quite sure where that stands. Seira, I think you know more how to get people in touch with that letter. I assume he's still looking for support for that letter. But it's also a matter of raising the voice, not just signing a letter. If this news about Del Valle was new to you, that shows how deeply buried this story is. And again, whereas Durant, I was at Berkeley in '68 for the centennial of Berkeley, and man, everything is all about Durant. And he, quite frankly, didn't do all that much, not as much as Del Valle did. And certainly Durant didn't have to deal with the nativists the way that Del Valle did. So Del Valle did some very, very heavy lifting, and he's very magnanimous about it. So we need to make that just part of the UCLA story. It's not part of it right now. Just as Latinos are not part of the Civil War story, although that's why we celebrate Cinco de Mayo, was our experience of the Civil War, part of our fight for equality and freedom.
And I want to highlight what you mentioned. We do have just dropped in the chat the petition that Dr. Hayes-Bautista was referencing. It's in the chat. So action right now you could take is to sign that petition. If you are interested in supporting the naming effort for Del Valle, please consider joining us in that effort. What do you think is the likelihood of getting a building named after him? This is a question to both of you. What do you think?
Should be pretty simple. Hardly costs anything. It's just a matter of public pressure more than anything else. I mean, why is it that Durant gets such renown for not doing very much? He had a pretty good publicist, I guess.
Mm.
And I just want to say that I just want to say thank you for the interest for everybody, because even for myself, I think it's a shared history, and it's part of our identity as alums too. You know, it's part of, we stand on the shoulder of those giants. You know, the mission of UCLA, between being the research, the public service, and the education, that vision came from those visionaries. So if we are truly upholding our mission and our vision of wanting to bring those future Bruins here to campus, and it's not just Latinos, you know, like I said, it's just everyone. It's really making sure that that information and that knowledge is really shared in all spaces, because it is for everyone. This is an institution for everyone. And when Del Valle was putting this institution together, he wasn't just thinking, well, you know, let's put this institution just because. There was a vision of bringing it here to this space. And I think that's where we all could also share this information with others. We'll definitely, in the thank you email and on our website will be, there will be a video. We weren't able to get the video out today, but there will be some video, there will be some materials, and just being interested and starting to have that conversation with others that are actually at the table, or just listening. Just, I think that's a great effort as well. Just listening and sharing your thoughts about this is a big step. So just sharing this space was wonderful. So thank you for taking that time, because that shows that that support.
And we have a few more questions here. One very quickly was asked, where can we find the podcast?
Oh, yes.
And
I don't know. I think
drop that in the, you can drop that in the chat, please.
Well, Giselle, could you drop it in the chat? Giselle is online, I think, or Adriana. I don't have I just opened my chat. I'm so sorry. I was so nervous. I was so focused on my screen, so I can't multitask when I'm nervous.
No worries. We're here for you. We're all here together in this space.
Thank you. So I don't know, Adriana, Giselle, can you drop the would it be
Yeah,
okay? It's
that's
gente and health. Yeah.
And you can send it out in the thank you email afterwards. So, and then next question is,
Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Corey.
would you be interested in informing other people outside of the United States about contributions and influence of Hispanic Americans to United States history, for example, during National Hispanic Heritage Month in September?
Yes, very much so. In fact, we have learned from this pandemic how to use virtual events much better, so that for this upcoming Cinco de Mayo, for example, we're doing a series of virtual presentations. We're doing our podcast materials around Cinco de Mayo. And in September for Hispanic Heritage Month, we're going to do something similar, but looking at the role of Latinos for American independence and prior to American independence. And we will be putting together a series of presentations and podcasts on that. And then, of course, there's always the ongoing situations during the year of other Latino contributions, such as the Latino gross domestic product research that we do every year. Latinos have created, the 60 million Latinos in the US have created the world's 8th largest economy. That's a big dog economy. And we do presentations on that. So yes, we're getting better thanks to Seida's work on using the virtual platforms to spread the message out. So we plan to have a push for every Cinco de Mayo and every 16th of September for every Hispanic Heritage Month. We're going to be stepping up our game significantly to have virtual presentations. And of course, virtually, they can be shared around the world. I believe we're doing a Cinco de Mayo presentation for the American University at Rome.
Well, that's
And
awesome.
I don't have to fly.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. And I can connect you to the person who asked that question, and perhaps you can do it in that country or for that country in that space as well.
Sure.
That concludes the Q&A. And so I wanted to thank everyone for, gosh, this has been great, so informative. And now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Paco, to do our closing for this evening.
Wow, this is where si se puede or en si se pudo is very appropriate. I just want to, again, we're going to be closing out our virtual event, and we're going to stop recording at this point.